Most people think that the key to podcasting is having great conversations, posting consistently, and letting time take care of the rest. But after working with 400 plus business owners, I found that most end up stuck for years with a podcast that feels hard and invisible. And it's because they're just winging it instead of following proven systems for growth and monetization. So in this video, I'm going to show you 4 proven systems that's generated our clients millions of downloads, the biggest mistake that wrecks your listenership and sales, and finally, how to apply these systems to make growing and monetizing your podcast feel easier. So at the start, I want to show you why you can't afford to ignore these systems. Look, imagine for a second you have 2 contractors. Both have the exact same goal to build their first home. Now, one gets a blueprint before laying his first brick, while the other starts building, putting bricks down, and he thinks he'll figure things out and adjust as he goes. 6 months later, the first contractor has a house that's standing, and the second one has a pile of bricks that don't line up, walls that need to be torn down and rebuilt, and a foundation that can't hold the weight of what he wants to build on top of. And he's left feeling confused as to why things weren't working out. But it's because he was missing the systems to build from. And look, this is exactly what most business owners are doing. They're stacking their bricks, assuming that more episodes, more interviews, promotion, plus time will get them the growth and monetization they want. But they end up stuck spending years on a show that didn't have the right systems to drive growth and sales for their business. Because without the right systems, listeners can't find you, your engagement stays low, and the podcast plateaus. Now, this is the point where most eventually quit, whilst your competitors with worse content but better systems scale past you. So to make sure this stops happening to you, I'm going to share with you the first system you need, which is an exposure system, a way to be consistently found by new listeners every single month. Most podcasters get their first listeners through their personal network, hosting on social media and word of mouth. The issue is most business owners keep running the same system they used to launch their podcast, believing that doing more of what used to work will eventually pay off in the long run. But they overlook the simple fact that what got them here won't get them to that next level. And that completely wrecks their growth and sales from their podcast. And they end up stuck posting great content for years, promoting, having these great conversations with guests that doesn't move the needle, no matter how hard they try. And it's because those old systems they used to launch their show doesn't take advantage of how podcasts actually get discovered. But more on this later. Look, launching a podcast is kind of like opening a new restaurant in your neighborhood, where your main growth strategy was handing out flyers to the locals. Now, the first week of launching, everyone comes, family, friends, people that were just curious, and people who maybe didn't even like the food, just wanted to show up to see what the fuss is all about. So you're booked out, but 6 months passes and the novelty is gone. The people who actually love your restaurants, they're now regulars. And the curious ones who tried it once but didn't actually like it, well, they just move on. And you're sat there wondering why our tables half empty even though you're still handing out flyers, unaware that everyone who was close by in your neighborhood already know you exist and you've depleted the pool of people in your current network who actually care. And the thing is, handing out more flyers to people who already know you exist won't solve your half-empty share problems. What you actually need is to ditch the old strategy that you used to launch a restaurant and start a new approach that allows you to be discovered by new customers outside of the current network of people who already know you. So for example, getting your business ranked on Google Maps so that when new people move into the area and search best Italian nearby, you show up. And that's exactly why you need a new approach when it comes to reaching listeners outside of your current network who are actually interested in the topic you cover on the show. And we believe that the new way was to get clients to go viral by posting on social media, even though we hated being online constantly pushing, and so did they. And even when a post did go viral, their listenership didn't grow. And it wasn't until we met a guy called Jake Ward who grew his podcast past 300,000 monthly listens that we discovered a system known as podcast SEO. Now, this changed everything for ourselves and our clients because it was a proven way to get our clients ranked on page 1 of Apple and Spotify. These are the number 1 platforms that new listeners go to find new shows to listen to. So when they ranked on page 1, that meant they were found constantly by new listeners who were searching for their content. So here's how this exposure system works. First, you find out the 2 to 3 main keywords your audience use to find a podcast like yours. So if your podcast is all about, let's say, veganism, the keywords might be vegan, plant-based diet, and sustainable eating. The second thing you then need to do is add these keywords to your show name, your episode titles, and your show descriptions consistently. Now, this tells Apple and Spotify who your show is for and what your show is about. So now the algorithm actually knows who to share your show to. And then the final step is you publish content over time and add those words in your episode titles. Look, if your content is good, which I presume if you're watching this, it likely is, you'll rank higher on these platforms and become more found by the right listeners who are searching for your content. And this is what we call true organic growth, where the more content you post, the faster you grow because your show is easily found by new listeners. And it's exactly how clients like Whitney went from struggling to break past 600 monthly downloads after 2 years of podcasting, posting on social media, doing everything under the sun. We finally got her ranked on page 1 of Apple and Spotify, and she blew past 7,400 monthly downloads 6 months later. So look, the first system that you need is an exposure system, a system to get strangers consistently discovering your podcast. But look, here's the thing, podcast growth doesn't really happen when someone listens once. It happens when they listen once and then become hooked on your content. So the second system is building a simple retention system that gets them to stay. This is a way to get new listeners binging your back catalog and itching to listen to new episodes you release. Now, without this, you're left with a one-hit wonder show that doesn't build up a highly engaged audience. So I'm going to show you how to actually build a retention system that keeps listeners hooked so you can drive more growth and sales from your podcast. Now, here's a massive problem for most business owners. They don't even realize they have a retention problem. And this is what keeps their shows stuck for years. They look at their downloads per episode or their downloads per month. They see roughly the same numbers, and then they assume they have a loyal audience that keeps coming back. But that isn't what's actually happening. Imagine for a second your podcast audience is like a bucket with holes in the side. Exposure is the water that's pouring into the bucket. But the problem is there's a hole in the side. So no matter how much exposure, water, you add to this bucket, there's a leak, which means the bucket never fills up. So no matter how much water you add, the bucket never fills up. And in this context, it's not because your audience is loyal and stable that your numbers are the same. It's actually because you're losing old listeners at the same rate you're gaining new ones. And that's why the growth stays the same over time. So I'm now going to show you where this retention hole is that most podcasters don't see, and then how to actually fix it. You see, most podcasters lose listeners after their first episode because they end up covering a broad range of topic based on what they're interested in or what their guest wants to talk about. And in doing so, they break the promise that won them the listener in the first place, because the topic that got them to click play isn't the same one that's consistently covered on the show. So they leave and never return. Now, let me show you what this looks like. Now, imagine for a second you're a first-time vegan and you found the podcast episode that was all about being a first-time vegan. So you click on it, you listen to the show, and you love it. So from here, you go to the back catalog. You're super excited thinking, oh my God, finally, a podcast that actually speaks to a first-time vegan. You scroll through the past episodes looking for more vegan content, but what do you find? Well, one episode is about bodybuilding. The one before that was about mental clarity. And then the next one is all about general health. And suddenly you go from being excited about this new podcast you discovered to realizing that this podcast really isn't for me. And this is what happens to your listeners, because the thing that got them to click play in the first place is nowhere to be found in the rest of your show. And that's exactly why so many podcasts lose listeners they've worked so hard to attract. They don't have a strong content strategy that keeps their listeners hooked because they're focused on talking about things they want to talk about or the things that their guests are interested in, when they should be obsessing over solving the painful problems their listeners are going through and make sure that every single episode is related to what attracted those new listeners in the first place. Now imagine you have the same vegan podcast, but instead they had a back catalog full of episodes all around being a first-time vegan. An episode about how to stop feeling overwhelmed in the first 30 days of starting a new vegan lifestyle. Now, the whole show becomes instantly bingeable because every single episode feels relevant. The titles feel like they were made for this listener. And that's what a retention system actually is about. Keeping the promise that got a new listener hooked on your episode in the first place. So here's the steps you can take to apply that to your show. Step 1, pick a specific person, not everyone, one specific person who's going through one specific struggle. Step 2 is to build episodes around that person's real problem, not random topics that you want to talk about. The actual painful problems they're going through that they want solved. And then step 3 is to make a back catalog feel connected. So when someone scrolls through your old episodes, they're thinking, holy crap, I need every single one of these episodes. And then step 4, publish new episode covering the same problems in the same lane. So subscribers know exactly why they're staying. And this is how you keep them hooked on your content. But look, even with a podcast that's being found, and even if people are coming back every single week for your episodes, they're not going to magically throw money at you. And this is where most podcasters get it wrong. They believe that if they just grow their podcast big enough, then the show will just monetize itself. Now, I wish that was the case. That would make my job so much easier, but it's not. You need a system to turn listeners into leads, buyers, clients, or customers. And when you don't have this in place, that's how you end up with a podcast with 10,000, 50,000, sometimes 100,000 monthly listens, but still barely making money. And it's because you don't have a monetization system you control. So what does a system look like for business owners and experts? Well, right now, for most business owners and experts, the system involves either not making an offer at all to their audience, in which case, how are you expecting them to buy from you? Or making an offer that's weaker than an octopus trying to deadlift. And it's because they don't have a system that allows them to create calls to actions that are persuasive and gets their audience taking action consistently. So they give CTAs that sound like, check out the link in the show description or visit my podcast to find out more. But this falls flat and no one takes action because there's no clear problem. There's no urgency that makes them take action today. And there's no clear benefit as to why they should do so. And that's exactly why we use a simple monetization system called PAS, which stands for Problem, Agitate, Solution, when we give our calls to action. So we first call out the problem your listeners are experiencing right now. Then you'll agitate the problem and show them why it matters and what it's costing them to not solve this today. And then finally, you present a solution that tells them the exact step they need to take in order to gain a benefit and solve their problem. Here's what it looks like all together. Look, if you are a first-time vegan and you are struggling to figure out what you can actually eat, how to get enough protein, and how to build meals that don't leave you hungry, you're not alone. The problem is the longer you try to figure this out all by yourself, the more overwhelming it becomes, and you end up spending hours deep in research, second-guessing every meal, and wondering if you're even doing it properly. And that's why we created the First Time Vegan Starter Kit. It gives you a simple step-by-step plan for what to eat, what to buy, and how to make the transition of becoming a first-time vegan without feeling confused or overwhelmed. Now you can grab this starter kit for free using the link in the show description. Now look, this works because it doesn't just tell people what to do, it connects the action to the problem they really want to solve, and it inspires them to take action today and shows them the cost, building urgency, of why they have to take action. And that's what a real monetization system does. When the right listener finds your podcast, binges your content, and starts to trust you as the expert, there's a simple and clear path they can take to go from a listener to a lead and eventually a client. Now, I hope you can see how all of these systems fit nicely together. And now onto the fourth and final system you need. And this one quietly decides whether or not the other systems actually works or whether they slowly get abandoned. This is the tracking system. Imagine for a second you're driving at night fast on a road you've never been before. There's no speedometer, there's no gauge of the fuel, and your headlights are barely working. Now the car's moving forward, but you've got no idea if you're about to run out of petrol or drive into the edge of something. You're just going, hoping for the best. And that's exactly what happens to most business owners when they're trying to run their shows. They publish episodes, they see some downloads happening. Every now and then someone books in a call and they assume their podcast is working. But if I ask you right now, which episodes drive the most inquiries, what title format gets the most listens, what topics actually convert versus the one that gets loads of downloads but doesn't move the business forward, most business owners and experts genuinely couldn't tell you the answer. And it's because they don't have a system to track whether or not something is working or whether something is not. And that's why they keep stuck for years with a podcast that barely gets noticed or makes money. Because you can't see what's broken, so you can't fix it before it costs you. And you're not iterating every single month on data and feedback. You're essentially just guessing and hoping that you speak more into the microphone, the podcast will eventually blow up. So look, the fourth system is making this measurable. You need a way to track every single month which episodes drive the most inquiry, which titles drives the most growth, and which formats actually moves the needle forward. Now, this doesn't need to be complicated or crazy fancy. Honestly, a simple spreadsheet that just tracks these numbers every single month does the job. Now, by you tracking this data, you can actually read the information every single month, and you can make improvements based on what's proven to work, not just based on hope and guesswork. So again, that's a fourth and final system, which is a tracking system. And those are the four systems you need. Number one, an exposure system to actually consistently be found by new listeners. Number two, a retention system, a way to keep listeners coming back for more so the show compounds month over month. System three, a monetization system, a way to communicate to your audience that gets them to take action consistently and actually reach out and buy your stuff. And finally, system number four, a tracking system to measure whether something is working or not, and to know whether you need to double down or whether you need to eliminate actions that aren't driving the results. Now, building these systems are a key part of growing a successful podcast. But if you don't have the right podcast format or structure, none of the systems will explode your podcast's growth. So click this video here that breaks down in full detail how to build the foundations of a podcast to ensure these systems actually drive the growth and monetization you want.